join us, and then they will then we'll hopefully just catch them up. It shouldn't be too easy. I'll just do a few quick introductions. Firstly, who I am. My name is Joel Greenwood. I'm the Planning Director with the Kennebec Valley Council of Governments. We're working with the town of Winslow to develop their new comprehensive plan, and this is one of 2 public participation meetings just to get comments, feedback, and answer questions about that comprehensive plan. On the call with me, I have my colleague Will Harper. Will, do you want to say hello?
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm going to be handling questions in the chat. I also am going to be taking notes of today's event, and so I'm going to go ahead and post that in the chat for everybody. That's a live document that you can feel free to click on and take a look. We'll be making it a part of the comprehensive plan in one way or another, probably not verbatim. But if you're interested in seeing how I'm transcribing what you're saying, I'm going to do my best to capture the essence. But I'm not a stenographer, so I can't quite get it verbatim. So yeah.
Thank you, Will. And I don't know if we just introduce a few folks from the town. And now, Erica, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Good evening, everybody. I'm Erica Lacroix. I'm the town manager in Winslow, and glad to see that we've got people joining us, and hope everybody feels they've got a good chance to participate and get some ideas out there.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And I know we have several other people who are on the committee. And for folks watching on the Facebook feed, perhaps, if at any point you have questions and comments, we'll try and monitor the Facebook feed. So if you comment on there, we'll try and keep an eye on that. Hopefully we can see those comments in real time. Yeah, the other thing, as Will said, we have in the chat box, there is a Google Doc, which will be like the live version of notes. You know, so if we were doing this in person, we'd usually have a big flip chart and we'd note down everything that was of the comments. So if you'd like to keep an eye on that, just to make sure that if you have a point that you raised, to make sure that that's recorded to the best of your satisfaction. The other thing there in the chat is like just the informational packet for this, which has the basic agenda and some information regarding the topics that we want to talk about. I guess what I'll do is I'll just share my screen with that packet to save people potentially having to just open it themselves. So the idea of this session, and we had one previously last Wednesday on the 16th, is to basically just try and get public input as much as we can for the comprehensive plan for the town of Winslow. So what we have done is we've kind of about halfway through the process now. We've been working with the committee of the town to gather a lot of data and information into formulating the inventory section, which basically gives a nice up-to-date snapshot of where the town is with all its current information gathered in one place. And you know, using that as a basis to have a discussion about where the town wants to go within the next 10 to 12 years, per se. So the idea of this public participation, and the other side of this is what that we did manage to do before the COVID interruption, is we did manage to do a town-wide survey. We had electronic versions and paper versions distributed and returned, which, you know, we asked some pertinent questions and got some information back. There is a link in that in that packet which takes you to the online results from that, if anyone wants to look at the answers that were given. That gives also some feedback that we got through that. And the whole idea really is just to try and get together as much information and opinion and comments from people, so that going forward, because the second half of the plan is to formulate the goals and the policies of the town in order to reach kind of a version of the town that most people want to see in the future, and so that the committee can feel fairly confident in formulating those with as much feedback as possible from these kind of events. The committee will be meeting going forward to do that. All those meetings will be open to anyone that would like to attend. We'll obviously we'll post through the town when those will be. So, you know, throughout this whole process, any kind of any kind of interaction is welcome. People are welcome to give comments via email or come to meetings or send or call us individually if they'd like to. What was identified as part of the committee's work and really as part of the pertinent question of that survey that we had was a couple of particular topic areas that we wanted to cover during these sessions. We can't possibly try and talk about everything just because that would be probably take far too long. There's 8 to 9 different topic areas within the comprehensive plan, and if we talked about all of them, we'd be here for months and months. I think we do talk about them as we go through, but we wanted to specifically look at some that were probably considered to be the most important for the town of Winslow. Those were identified as economic development and housing, almost kind of hand in hand. The committee understood that the way that the town wants to develop economically and the housing situation are kind of intrinsically linked. I mean, a lot of these things are all linked together, but those specifically wanted to be carved out. So we'll talk about that first. The second would be public facilities. So that's anything that is municipally owned and operated, whether that be infrastructure, recreational services and so forth. And then the final, which is almost kind of a prerequisite that we would have to talk about to get information about, is the growth and land use. That really does tie to all of the topics, but specifically we need to talk about as the town grows or changes over the next 10 years or so, how we want to see that ideally and what the town can do to try and guide that in a way that that the town feels is acceptable. And lastly, we have to have some consultation on what's called the vision statement. The vision statement itself is probably hopefully just a good distillation of the town's thoughts about how it would like to be in the future, roughly 10, 15 years into the future. So we already have one that has kind of been developed and commented on, so we'll use that as a basis and just see if people have got any comments about perhaps changing some of the language on that. It looks like we'll keep it fairly succinct to maybe like three sentences and see if people have any comments about that. So all being well, I don't want to go too much past 8 o'clock for the last one. We went a little bit over by about 10 minutes, but I thought that we had a really good discussion and we fit everything in there. Does anyone have any general questions about this point, about maybe the comprehensive plan in general or anything? I will say that just because those are the topics that we identified, it doesn't mean that we can't talk about anything else. If there's something that someone specifically wants to talk about that's related to the town or the plan, everything's on the table. There's no things we're not allowed to talk about. We'll take down all information as regards to this. Nice to see a few more people have joined. Ellery, Peter, nice to see you. If we've got no general questions,
just one, Joel.
Yeah,
if you could just, like you did last time, explain the importance of a comprehensive plan to a town as far as grants, as far as, what does it enable us to do? It's a non-binding document, but it does help with the application of different grants. And if you could just go over briefly. Yeah,
absolutely. Contrary to kind of often the opinion, often the myth out there is that the state requires every community to have a comprehensive plan. It's not mandatory, although it is strongly recommended. The comprehensive plan for a town is not in itself regulatory like an ordinance. It doesn't compel anyone to do anything. It doesn't have regulations that need to be followed and it issue judgments upon. But what it does do is if you have what's called a consistent plan where the state reviews it and finds that it's got everything in that they need, it enables the town, like logistically, it enables the town to be eligible for several funding and grant opportunities through various state agencies. Also to give precedence for towns with a consistent comprehensive plan, you might score more points on a grant scoring application, for example. But also, it's also a good legal underpinning for any land use regulations that a town might have. So the town's zoning, if that's ever substantially challenged in court, then the comprehensive plan gives the town some legal underpinning for land use ordinances, for example, and zoning. But I think the most important thing for me is that it really is just for a community, especially a community which is a good size in Central Maine like Winslow. It's a really important document to be used as a guide, really. If you can get what's a reasonable agreement across the community, and of course, once the plan is finished, it does have to be voted through by the town itself to be adopted by the town. So there is another option for public comment right at the end. If it is adopted by the town, then that it can be really used as a guidance document for the town going forward. There'll be a list of goals and priorities in there that the town can start to work towards, and it should identify who might be responsible for doing that and over what time period. But it really is a good document for the town to have to consult, whether it be the planning board, whether it be the town council, to see if there's any major decisions being made or major kind of ways to focus your energy. Then the comprehensive plan should be a guidance document. It should really be there for reference throughout the most important decisions in a town, rather than just be on the shelf after it's finished. So I think in the general sense, that's the most important thing, although it does give a whole load of benefits in terms of the town's standing, in terms of financial opportunities through the state and federal grants and things. So I will, Peter.
Joel, as you and perhaps most people on this call know, I've been very much involved in developing a trail network, and some of the most successful trails are actually here in Winslow on the Kennebec. And in any of the fundraising that I and Kennebec Messalonski Trails did for the trails that I had like a responsibility for, we didn't get any state funding. But now I'm thinking, what about Fort Halifax Park? Did that get state funding thanks to having it as an item on the comprehensive plan back in the day? Ray, maybe you know.
Yeah, Joel, if I might, I can't tell you that it was definitive in why we got the grant, but it did add to the application process. So having a comprehensive plan, that recreation, and that we would develop recreational areas in the town, it didn't hurt, that's for sure. And whether that was the reason why we got the 50% matching grant for the initial, and I think that was in the range of, I don't want to be quoted on it, but around a $50,000 matching grant. So we were able to do a lot of the parking lot relocation, a lot of the trail systems, a lot of what you see down there now was done with a matching grant and from the state. And that was meant in the application process, having a comprehensive plan definitely didn't hurt. That's for sure. I don't know how much it helped, but it definitely was part of the process.
Okay, and as a follow-up to that item, as you know, a number of years ago, goodness, it must be 12 years ago now, the dam went out on the Sebastopol River, and there are two possible trails on the north side and the south side, more or less on the east-west portion of the river. And is that the kind of specificity that you, Joel, would want in the comprehensive plan, or just a general statement that people in Winslow like their trails?
No, I think if there's already a good sense of priorities and specific projects that already kind of envisaged, I think it's helpful to list those in the plan specifically, because if they are listed specifically and mentioned in the plan, and that does, and and the plan is accepted in a general sense, then it gives a good mandate for those projects to be pursued. Absolutely, I think there's nothing wrong with being specific about specific projects that are already known about. I definitely welcome that.
So next, Joel, would you like a map showing where I'd like them to be?
Absolutely. When we when we get to talk about, well, we can talk about, you might be able to add some additional information to the recreational section that's already being drafted, but certainly in the, if we're talking about identifying those down the line, if you send that information through, we'll talk about it at the relevant meeting, and be sure to list those out. That'd be really helpful. Thanks, Peter.
Good. Thank you.
Just one quick little note. If what we usually do when we're doing these kind of meetings in person is we try and have a few little exercises just to give other ways of giving kind of people a way to give feedback. And what we sometimes would do is what's called almost like a penny voting exercise. So what we would do is we'd give people 10 pennies when they came in, and there'd be a little table set up with jars, and each jar would represent an area of discretionary spending. So say if there was, discretionary spending that the town might have, whatever that might be, and it's represented by, you would place your coins to which ones of those you would like to see it spent in. So we've done our best to kind of recreate this virtually, and we'll have a poll that should appear at some point through the magic of this Zoom software.
I think since I made you host, I think you have polling privileges now.
There we go. I will launch the poll, and what it is, so each kind of question is an area, so to speak, of discretionary spending in the general sense. So, and I think we have, how many do we have in total there? So we have 7, and they're broadly based. So just in a general sense, if you get a chance at some point throughout this process, and if you essentially try and rank each one of those about how important you feel it is to the town, and how, and you can do that for each one. If we can give a general idea of the kind of things that people like to see supported in the town. So we'll leave that live as we go on. So and we'll get to see, it'll tell us here and there who's been filling it out. So we'll give you a reminder later on. But if you get a chance just to fill that in, I know some of you may have already done it in the previous meeting, so you can't double dip. Well, maybe you can, but but we'll leave that running, and people can, hopefully it's fairly intuitive to just to follow that through and choose and select which one of these you feel the most strongly about. Okay, I'm going to move right into the kind of first general topic area then, which would be economic development and housing. The handout that is available in the chat box gives a few highlights about the information we've gathered. Bearing in mind that we'll probably try and update this with any new 2020 census data whenever that comes available. I'm not quite sure of the timeline. I think it might be September, but we've given it to the best of our ability at the town. We tried to get as decent information as we can. I don't think I'll go through every piece of information. I just realized I'm not sharing my screen there. I won't go through every bullet point, but if people want to look at this just for background information, I don't think it tells us anything that maybe folks didn't already know about the kind of local economy and housing situation for the town. There's nothing particularly surprising in there, I don't think. It talks about, how many people kind of live and work in Winslow, and how many people maybe live in Winslow and work elsewhere, so on and so forth, all the different kinds of occupations and sectors that the people that live in Winslow work in. Also talks about housing, about how much housing there is of different types, and how much housing we're likely to need if we look at the kind of population growth going forward. The general sense is that the population in Winslow is not expected to necessarily grow much over the next 15 to 20 years from demographic estimates. But that doesn't mean that you won't need to still develop new housing, because even if the population stayed relatively stable, stayed about the same, what's happening is the household size is continuing to reduce because people are living in smaller households, smaller families, more people living having single occupancy. So what happens is you have the same amount of people, but you still need more houses to support that same amount of people. So one of the most important calculations or estimates in that sense is if you look at the kind of population estimates and then you look about how many housing units it would need to accommodate that, it actually still averages out to about 17 new housing units per year, which is not insubstantial. So if you think about that, 340 over the next 10 to 15 years, some of those perhaps could be, infill or repurposed existing housing, but they've got to be built somewhere. So it ties to the growth of the land use that we're talking about. So what I'd like to do for each of these stages is just perhaps ask a few simple questions and let people start discussing things and give their feedback. The first one, if we talk about the local economy for Winslow, or how much, Winslow's obviously really tied into the regional economy, whether that be the central main area of Waterville and Fairfield and Oakland, or the larger central main area. But does anyone have any particular thoughts about what new kinds of business would be best suited for Winslow? Does it want to kind of build on what Winslow has already, or does there need to be perhaps some kind of way to try and target new businesses that would where people would like to see within Winslow itself? Does anyone have any thoughts about that? This is where we need someone like Ray just to kickstart the conversation.
Yeah, like I did last time is, obviously in the town of Winslow, we don't have what we would call a business district. We have industrial district or industrial park, but we don't have like a business district. I think our business district is pretty much Bay Street, but like we had at the last meeting, a lot of our businesses are in a mixed use type of environment. But for new businesses that I would see, unfortunately, we lost our second pharmacy recently. So we had 2 pharmacies and now we're down to, again, 1 pharmacy. I look at like doctor's office as a complex. No, we do have to go to Winslow for doctors and for
Ray's turned into a robot. Is anyone else? Has he gone for everyone else?
Sorry, Ray, your connection is
primary
breaking up quite a
medical
bit.
care.
We lost you for part of that, Ray. But I think you were saying about
You're lucky.
No, you were saying about how some of the healthcare services aren't concentrated, whether it be pharmacies or primary care. You still have to go across the river or further afield, down to Augusta maybe, to access an actual doctor's office. So, I mean, some of the information that we found is, although there's a large percentage of people that live in Winslow who work within the like the service sector, which would include like the medical industries, but there's actually nowhere within Winslow really that tailors to that. So is there a way that there could be like a little area that has these kind of medical services in, whether that be specific, maybe a primary care or specific specialities, pharmacies? That might be something that that the town might want to encourage somehow. Erica, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I was going to say that, we talked a bit last time about how we develop Winslow overall, and we need new businesses. We also need more young families moving in. And I think one of the things that we need to be developing as businesses is things that people want to come here to attend or to visit. We just don't have a lot of service industries or entertainment industries. And when you have those, it brings in outside money, and we need outside money so that we're not putting everything on the backs of the taxpayers to develop this area. So I think the businesses we have here are absolutely wonderful. The industries we have coming in, where we have Orion Rope Works, we have Standard Waterproofing, we have Northeast Labs. I think those are all wonderful, but those are bringing in people to work, not so much people to live. So I think we need some businesses that really attract people to come here and want to spend time in Winslow outside of their normal workday.
Excellent, thank you. Anyone else got any thoughts about what type of business that would hope to be developed in town? Sally?
A few years ago now, the Agriculture Commission did a survey of local farmers of what their needs might be. One set of needs that they were clear about was they've lost the infrastructure that supports farming. And infrastructure might be an abattoir, it might be packaging facility, and it would help them enormously. So things that support agriculture, we do have some businesses like Agway that does that, and Johnny's, Fedco. But anyway, so they could be more specific than I can be probably, but those are some things supporting farming.
Yeah, I think one of the things we've heard about all over the state and we're involved in a little bit of work with is like the secondary processing of main locally produced main products. So,
Right.
If people are producing a fresh product, there's not only can they sell that directly, but you can then sell it to secondary processors to do something with it, and maybe and then move it on into the market. And that is something that seems to be a need, and Winslow could certainly look at those opportunities too to not only improve its general economy, but to support that agricultural side too, which I think is an excellent point. Thank you.
Welcome.
Hey, Sally, who did you say conducted that survey?
Agricultural Commission.
Agriculture Commission, okay.
Yeah.
Just kind of similarly to this kind of thing. Does anyone can anyone think or identify any specific barriers that might be preventing business of any kind, really, or economic development of any kind from occurring, that the town might be able to, the town can't do everything, unfortunately. It can do a lot of things, but often people talk about barriers to business and barriers to growth. I wonder if there's some easily identifiable ones that we could make note of. Erica?
I think one of them is simply a lack of places to build. There's a lack of available properties.
Space, yeah.
Yeah, we've heard that a lot from Don Plord, that he has businesses that approach him that want to build here, but he can't find an appropriate location for them. There's just not enough. There's not enough appropriate property, and there's not enough property for sale.
Ray, did you want to?
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is, comprehensively, which is
Ray, we keep losing your connection. Maybe try just turning your camera off and just doing the audio, and then sometimes that'll improve the stream. It kind of reduces the bandwidth. So if you stop video in the bottom left and then see if that helps. Oh, we're still not getting him.
Sorry.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, part of the meeting last week was the fact that zoning wise, we need to look at our zoning in the town of Winslow. We need to find areas where that we can identify. So I think,
We've lost you again, Ray. We're gonna have to replay your testimony from last time. I don't know what's like I say. If you try, just
in the next two look at the whole time.
okay, Ray. We keep losing you again for some reason.
It's okay. I'll just listen. I can hear everybody, but
Feel free to if you want to just pop things in the chat.
Yeah, I'll pop it in the chat. That would be great.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Sorry about that, Ray. Maybe it'll improve.
No problem.
Okay. So yeah, barriers to business do seem to be appropriate spaces and appropriate either existing existing structures with the right infrastructure and type for businesses to go in, or a place where some of these new things could be built potentially. I mean, I know the markets right now is interesting for building development, but not to say in the future it won't change again. But having, you know, available space that might be connected to the infrastructure that's needed is definitely something that we've identified and continue to hear about. So I think we've talked about a little about the different kinds of business and the mix. We will talk later on about land use and zoning, and that we usually was quite a bit of discussion about something the different zones in town or the land use areas. But does anyone have any other general thoughts about, before we kind of pivot a little to housing, about the local economic situation or anything related to that?
I'll say something. So I've been a Winslow resident for about 8 years, so I'm kind of new to this. This is my first meeting of this kind. But I guess to pivot off of Ray's question about zoning, I didn't hear everything he mentioned, but I think I would be interested, and this is related to Erica's point too, about sort of why it is that that commercial space is not available here. Is it a zoning issue, or is it something else that we're not doing correctly from the government side? So I think that's a good point. I think it's good to understand kind of why that is, instead of just sort of taking it as at face value. You know, why is it that these businesses are having a hard time finding space here? I'd be curious about that.
Absolutely, I think we've certainly bears looking at the existing layout of zoning and what might be able to be tweaked with that, and if there's any fundamental changes that might help. I mean, obviously, it's always the balance between, you know, protecting certain areas and you know, certain aspects of the town, and while encouraging others. So that is absolutely, I think, going to be a key tenet of this plan going forward, is particularly the land use, and we'll talk about, I think, a bit more about that a little later. But it is definitely something that seems to be identified, where the commercial space, whether that be literal or future in terms of actual zones that have appropriate space for development, seem to be kind of an issue that's been brought up a number of times. So that's definitely something that's going to be reflected, I think, in this plan. I appreciate you making coming on and adding your thoughts about that. That's good to hear. But you know, that's something that I think, you know, the planning board will certainly be interested in going forward, about amendments to zoning and having some reasons for that. I know. I'm just thinking about the prospect of developing the, you know, for want of a better word, the downtown core, so that the, you know, the main area across the river there, across the bridge, and then you have, you know, what is considered the downtown of Winslow itself, and making sure that perhaps working on some kind of plan to make that area a bit more centralized and attractive as like a downtown core, which kind of really feels like a sense of place, as opposed to just the other side of the river. I know that came up last time, so that there's like a defined kind of downtown area of Winslow that has, you know, certain attributes and the right mix of commercial and residential. Does anyone have any particular thoughts about that, in terms of how even just the kind of the appearance and the feeling about how the downtown of Winslow kind of, you know, I say downtown in quotes, I think everyone gets the general idea, that kind of core as you come over on this adjacent to the river. Does anyone have any particular thoughts about that? I was curious to see if anyone might have some comments.
Joel, I have a lot of, that particular area has probably been my biggest wish list area since I've gotten to the town of Winslow. That and Clinton Ave right across from the bridge. Since we don't have a defined downtown, we don't have an area that's, you know, quaint old buildings that could be renovated and brought up, and, you know, that that people are really interested. It's not the type of area, you'll see a lot of older downtown areas that people want to renovate and revitalize because they're historic and they're interesting. And our Bay Street area is not that. It's mostly, I mean, there are a few old properties along there, but mostly it's more modern type structures and not terribly attractive modern type structures. One of the things that we struggle with in that area is that we've got some defunct properties that aren't on the market and that the owners don't want to sell. So we need to find a way to incentivize the property owners either to sell to somebody that does want to develop or develop it themselves. I think that particular area is going to take a lot of public-private partnership and a desire to rebuild that and make it into something attractive. You know, there should be a lot of mixed use area there. It would have been wonderful had we been able to do something with the mill when that shut down, because that would have been a nice waterfront area that we could have turned into a mixed use facility. And I don't mean mixed use in the way we talk about it in zoning. I mean mixed use like there could have been shopping, lofts, dining, community space, maybe some entertainment. It could have been a really great area. In the absence of that, we've got what we have on Bay Street. So I'd be really interested to hear anybody who has ideas about how we can start getting that conversation going with local businesses and local leadership outside of just the government leadership on how we can start to spur some activity in that particular area, because I think that is one of the big barriers to everything else we're talking about. Image-wise, it makes Winslow look a bit shabby. If people never go any farther than that, that's all they see. It looks like an old mill town and nothing else. And if they never go any farther and see the beautiful rural areas we've got and some of the really pretty neighborhoods, you know, if that's all they see, then they're never going to go, oh, this would be a really great place to build a home, or this would be a really great place to send my kids to school, you know, or build my business. So I really do think that that particular area is one of our big barriers to moving forward. And I apologize for my dog's collar in the background. My door was closed, but the kids opened it.
Anyone else have any thoughts about well, I assume maybe general consensus on that idea?
Yeah, I concur.
Thank you, Peter.
I definitely agree. I think leveraging the river is definitely an important thing. That's a huge amenity here. So I think thinking about ways to bring that in is important. I know that's what's happening on the other side with Waterville. I know you're working on that and thinking about how to leverage the river as an amenity. So I think we need to do the same thing to some extent.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of physical assets that could be utilized. You've already got you got the Fort Halifax, you've got the riverfront, you've got a reasonable pockets of green space that you could develop that on one side of by the town offices, and then the other side, like I say, down by Fort Halifax. So making the most of those natural assets is definitely there's definitely something to be worked with there, I think. Okay, I think I'll pivot quickly to.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Hello.
Yeah, that's okay. I'm a little slow on the stuff
okay.
regarding the video. I'm thinking that there's got to be a way to not just incentivize building up the area. With Fort Halifax Park, I think there's events and parks and recreation events that can draw people in, but when you drive down Bay Street, it's like it's Dunkin' Donuts. People are just driving by. No, let's stop at Dunkin' Donuts, and then they continue on. We need something down there to keep them in town, like such as events and those kinds of things. And then yeah, so that was just a thought I had.
Absolutely, thanks, Kate. Yeah, I mean, it's about getting that something where there seems like there's an experience as opposed to just just a one-off stop kind of thing. So
Yeah,
you do
you
stop
you can get gas, you can drop off your redeemables, you can go to the dentist, you can, but nothing
walk by
is
the
gonna
river,
nothing
get
is
some
gonna
food, yeah.
nothing's gonna keep you down there. And there's not a place it is. And with the park there, I think that's a major advantage to the town, having that there and making it something that can draw people or events and that kind of thing into the town.
Absolutely, thanks, Kate. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll quickly, I think I'll just quickly pivot to housing, which is, it's kind of related to, well, it's kind of, everything's related to everything else, but the economic development and housing kind of often do go hand in hand. I know actually specifically this afternoon, we had an event with GrowSmart about developing housing, and Winslow's no different. Like a lot of central Maine communities, like a lot of communities in Maine in general, one of the major issues is the availability of affordable housing and physically the right type of housing, because as the demographics have changed, the type of housing that people need is changing, and there's an older population, but there's also, like I mentioned before, there's a smaller household size increasingly. So kind of more compact, affordable units. And affordable doesn't necessarily mean, fully subsidized. It could just mean, small enough to be more affordable in the general market, but it could also just be the kind of housing that seniors could utilize, or people on lower than median income. But also just making sure that there's different options. There's rentals available that might be in units or smaller individual homes. And this all, a lot of this can tie to regulations that the town might be able to tweak in terms of things like lot size. And when we talk about mixed use, there seems to be a bit of confusion, I think, sometimes when we say mixed use, because the town has a large kind of what's called mixed use corridor, but which is probably slightly different than what we would generally consider the term mixed use to be, kind of like what Erica was talking about, where you would have a core of buildings where perhaps the ground floor would be commercial for a store or of some kind, and then the upper floors might be apartments. So mixed use would be, different uses within the same, if not just the same building, then the same kind of smaller compact area, rather than having a much larger zone where you allow different uses on different lots. So just to make sure that that distinction when we talk about mixed use is kind of there, because there's kind of two different things, I think. But is it safe to say, I think it seems, the statistics seem to point us in that way, not that it's the be all and end all, but would most folks agree that there needs to be a focus on the provision of affordable housing? And that, like I say, that can take many forms, but housing that help people get onto the housing ladder, and also to help kind of seniors be able to afford to live in place without having to move, because traditionally a lot of this little old larger houses that just aren't suitable for fewer people, for smaller families to live in. So don't have any thoughts about that in terms of the type of housing that's available and how we and what the town should be looking to do.
I've heard quite a bit of talk about these tiny houses in the Waterville area. Is that allowed under Winslow's zoning, and does that appeal to any of the rest of you?
I'm not entirely sure how. I know there was maybe even a state law about tiny houses recently, where they should be allowed under certain, more generally allowed under certain provisions. I guess I'd have to check with maybe Adam, the code enforcement officer, at some point about whether they're technically allowed in different places at the moment. Does anyone else happen to know that off the top of their head?
Yeah, I don't know if you can hear me now. Can you hear me, Joe?
So far,
So, okay. Yeah, actually, Mike Mullins from Massachusetts through the planning board had a development that would be the development that's behind the high school, like near Frankwood Drive, off Kidder Street, and they were going to put in some smaller homes in that area there, very small lots, and it's never really materialized. So I think it's allowed under certain circumstances in some zones, and it has been researched in the past.
yeah, and like I said, I believe there was a state law passed fairly recently that does make them easier to cite, I think, because there was an issue. You don't obviously know about that, Will. Yeah.
Yeah, my inclination, I don't know enough about it, but my inclination would be that it would be enabled at the state level, but at the local level, it would be sort of either whether it's expressly permitted or whether a locality doesn't allow them. I know one of the big considerations for tiny houses is sewer and water hookup. In a lot of places that sort of negates any cost benefits from doing like individual, like if you have a small lot citing a tiny house, a lot of the cost of installing sewer and water in that developed area is going to sort of inflate that price. And then also in rural areas, septic and well considerations, in addition. So it doesn't necessarily solve problems, but it does address some other problems.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to add to that, we did look into the country, into the rural section of towns that we would lower lot size, have a common septic system, and some type of water system that was, connected to multiple homes, so that we could reduce the lot size from the minimum 2 acres to minimum a little lesser. And we have not got any development in that area either, any takers for development to try to make development easier through the years too. And so through the years, we have tried things. One of the things we've done also is not required for developments, not required. We've narrowed the streets. We have reduced the prerequisite for sidewalks. We have tried to lessen the cost for street development over the years, but that doesn't mean we can't go further, and we should go further, and we always need to relook at those areas to try to make development as user-friendly as possible.
Absolutely, thanks, Ray. Erica?
I know Lee had his hand up, so I guess if he could go and then I can take a turn.
Sure, yeah, I thought, Lee, do you have some comments?
Yes, I mean, I just wanted to, we were talking about the low-income housing. I do know for sure that there's currently only 3 low-income wheelchair accessible housing apartments in all of Winslow. And I myself have been behind the 8 ball trying to find a place to live a couple times. And I would love to see a developer come in, and if not, I don't know how feasible it would be to someone come in and build, a single story, 4 to 6 unit complex that would be open to low income, disability, even for veterans as well. And then by keeping it in a single unit under one roof, I know it makes, I'd like to think that it keeps construction costs smaller with a smaller footprint to keep everything internal and less things like that. And I know I've seen them in other communities, and I would love to see something like that here.
Excellent, thank you so much, Lee. I appreciate it. Erica?
So it's right along with that. And of course, Lee, we get this perspective of somebody who is in that situation, which is great, because I wasn't even thinking this comment was in my back of my head as soon as we started talking about this. But when we talk about single story living, a lot of times to save space, we're building up. but then you need elevators and things like that. I have had calls from elderly folks who are from Winslow, but they've had to move out of Winslow. They'd like to move back into Winslow, but because it is now hard for them to do stairs and things like that, there's no single-story homes available. There may be, you know, a lot of these older homes we talk about that are more of the ones that are built very close together. They may be 2 or 3 stories. The older, like large style houses. So Lee's exactly right from the standpoint of not just people with physical handicaps, but also just people who are older. And, you know, a lot of people move out of those big houses as they age, and we know this is an aging population. So it is kind of sad to talk to somebody who's saying, we'd love to move back to Winslow, but we can't find a home there. So I think that's definitely a good point. I did want to also address a little bit the reducing requirements for developments. I do agree we want to make it attractive and easy for developers to come in. My concern though with narrowing the streets and taking away sidewalks too much is we also want to have walkable communities. We want to be able to encourage people to be able to get out in their neighborhoods, walk. Hopefully, you know, if we can get the right kind of development in there, they can actually walk to a small market. They can walk to their hairdresser or their barber, you know, so that, because walkable communities are a very important thing to a lot of the younger set now. So that's my only concern with narrowing things too much. Narrow streets can help with traffic calming. That's, you know, possible there, but I don't really like the idea of seeing the sidewalks go away, because I do want to see us have the ability to have more pedestrian-based communities where people can access more things without getting in their cars and going. You know, but again, where do we put it? And I think when we do talk things like water and sewer, that kind of leaves us looking at areas that maybe we've turned into mixed use that maybe we ought to start reclaiming for residential, or look at a different type of mixed use, like Joel, your definition of mixed use being having a smaller kind of a microcosm where we've got housing and small shopping and amenities right there in one small concentrated area. I mean, it is, our sign says when we come through that it's a farm friendly community, which I think is wonderful, and we absolutely need them. But we also have to look at some of these in-town areas and what is the modern day definition of what a desirable community is to live in as well.
Absolutely, thank you. Anyone else got any comments about housing before we move on to public facilities? You know, which again it's all ties together, but any other housing thoughts before we move on? Or any other thoughts about anything else that we might not be covering? Feel free. Lee?
Yeah, I'd just like to add that currently we have that piece of property off Monument Street and Grand Street, the old St. John's School, and I'm kind of hoping that possibly the Diocese of Portland Catholic Church could do a similar project at St. John's School like they did in Waterville for the St. Francis property.
Yeah, I mean, I think if there's opportunities to repurpose, you know, sites or even existing older buildings to redevelop them into these kind of different, you know, either mixed use or specific type of housing units, that should definitely be encouraged. I think that's one of there's organizations like KVCOG, for example, who develop these kind of housing provisions in either in existing buildings or building new ones. I know they've just done a pretty impressive project in Skowhegan that I was involved with. And part of that, actually, talking about development, was they were quite more than happy to contribute towards the development of a sidewalk that's connected their development to the rest of the town, really. So most developers hopefully will be able to see the value in investing or making a contribution towards the investment, at least for public infrastructure to provide safe pedestrian access to their sites too, that connects those areas to the rest of the amenities, which I think is a really good idea. And if there's opportunities that already exist in town, then keeping an eye on those and getting ready to be able to see if they can act on those whenever there's opportunity arises, I think is a good thing. Like almost like Peter was saying, if he's got identified projects for trails, there's no harm in perhaps listing potential ideas for housing developments, whether that be in specific locations or more generally talking about types of development that are seen elsewhere to try and use as a model. So, Peter, yes.
I've been in this community now 40 years, and one of the things that puzzles me is that basically Waterville and Winslow, as well as come to that Oakland and Fairfield, but particularly Waterville and Winslow, are one community. And yet over the 40 years, there's been resistance to merging. Some towns in Maine have done that. Dover and Foxcroft, as you know, is one going across a river. And I became particularly familiar with with one in Quebec a little while ago, and that is East Saint-Georges and West Saint-Georges. And they joined as one, and it made a huge difference to the community as a whole. So one side of the river has a college, the other side of the river has a hospital, one side of the river has hotels, the other side of the river has churches, and there are shops on both sides of the river. And the trail, the Saint-Georges trail system is magnificent and came about, as I see it, since that merge. And their industrial capability also improved. Is that ever a topic of conversation of the council, or Erica, have you bumped into that since you've come here?
The only discussion I've ever heard anecdotally about merging with Waterville has been on the schools side. And my understanding, and not that I am against that idea, I think it's an idea that could be explored, and at least in terms of being a mutual cooperative situation, be a good idea. But my understanding of the general feeling among the residents of Winslow is they do not want to have their identity usurped by Waterville. There is a town identity, particularly when it comes to the schools, that people don't want to lose. On a practical basis, it absolutely makes sense to merge. I don't know if we could ever sell that to the public at large.
Yeah, I'm not sure how far you might get with that idea, but I think the concept in terms of making sure that working regionally, or Winslow certainly understanding its role in the region and being able to, there's no point trying to, for example, compete directly with Waterville, but to try and complement it and work closely with the neighboring towns. And try, there might be small interlocal agreements or cooperative agreements that could be, that could start things. I'm sure there might already be some, things like mutual aid for fire response and things like that. But I think this came up in the last meeting about understanding the relationship between Winslow and the rest of the central Maine towns, and looking how it can, work with them and actually see opportunities that. So you're not directly competing, but also complementing the region. There's no point, like I say, there's not much point trying to outdo a town and things that they're doing. You need to try and find your own way. But I like that idea of regional cooperation, I don't know if it'd ever get as far as looking to merge, but shared services, amongst other things, probably, where that's going to save the communities money. Hopefully that should be something that shouldn't be too unreasonable to think about.
Right.
I've been to St. George's and I've walked that park up in Quebec, Peter. But there's also, if it's I believe it's Seattle, not Seattle, Portland. It's either Portland or Seattle, where there's on both sides of the river. It's two different towns, but there's a connecting. It's a bike path. People run it. People, it's just and it crisscrosses the road. It goes like. There's a walking path underneath the bridges that take the cars across and under the train tracks and things like that, so that you cross back and forth between the two towns, and I think that's a great way to connect and cooperate together. So I've seen it in a number of places, as well as St. George's and out west. So and I haven't seen it in too many places on the East Coast, where there's a common pathway through that thing that blocks that runs between the two towns. So I think, developing something along the river on both sides that everybody on either side can enjoy, and they can crisscross back as they need. It's like the 2-cent bridge. That's a great little thing, but you need something on this side down on those mills, on the mill side, in order to develop that. Anyway.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. So I will, unless anyone's got anything.
I'd like to piggyback on those comments. I also agree that it's really probably quite important for us to think about what's going on the other side of the river with Waterville and all the investment downtown. Now is the time to sort of leverage what we have as well, and potentially work with them on that. I like this idea of cooperation, not necessarily merging, but certainly cooperation. And we have the 2-cent bridge. I've walked that many times. I like that a lot. I agree we need something on this side as well. We have Fort Halifax. I mean, it'd be really cool to have something that we could walk between downtown, because downtown Waterville is going to look pretty good pretty soon, I think. And people are going to want to go down there. I mean, imagine having a walkable path to Fort Halifax and having a summer concert series, or, these harvest festivals that someone mentioned. These are cool ways to potentially integrate and work off of what they're doing. There's no reason why we can't benefit from that, in my view.
Excellent, thank you. And I think that really does taper off into our next discussion about public facilities. So, I think similarly, I absolutely love the work that's being done. No, thanks, many thanks to you, Peter, for the Centenary Trail that runs all the way from Benton into Winslow and now kind of pops out where it does there. But that last connection to get from there to maybe the 2-cent bridge and then over to Waterville would be nice to formalize in some way. I know you can kind of do it. You can walk along the street there. But that would be just that last connection between, I'm trying to, what the actual name of the street is that you have to walk up.
Well, actually, there is a nice connection, and it goes via the elementary school, goes around the track for the high school, and then comes across a couple of paved roads to the town office, and then around the park.
Oh, okay. That's excellent. I must have just I probably just followed my nose in the general direction with it going the right way. But
and I thought you'd like to know, in case some of you don't, that this is okay. Recently, that whole thing that you've been talking about was is now part of a national trail system called the East Coast Greenway.
Right, yeah.
So instead of coming down Bay Street, which wouldn't be very good for bicycles anyway, because I found out from hard experience that you can fall off a bicycle when you cross the rail, which is at an angle. It now goes into Waterville across the Carter Bridge, and then comes to downtown Waterville, where there are lots of restaurants, then crosses the 2 Cent Bridge, comes through the school grounds, and then on further up through the East Kennebec Trail and the Rotary Centennial Trail.
Excellent. Well, I'll have to try that functional route out. But that's an example. And again, like I say, maybe there's a challenge there of connecting in the other direction across the bridge down to Fort Halifax. I know there's
Yeah.
not much space there. There's the railway line.
It's not easy.
Yeah. I mean, you could probably generally do it as a pedestrian, but it's not probably the easiest or most inviting walk at the moment. But in terms of public facilities, I mean, at the town, are there any particular services or physical facilities that the town has that might need some investment or some improvement that anyone can think of? And I know we've talked,
I'll go.
yeah, about the actual.
I've already put myself out there for the meeting in the past, so.
Go ahead.
Most immediately, we need to do something with our fire station. I expressed this at the last meeting. New equipment, that fire station was built back in the 60s. Equipment has evolved since then. The trucks are bigger, they're taller, they're longer. Where that facility was built right on the roadway, when you have to pull out trucks to inspect them, particularly the ladder truck, it is actually on the apron of the road once you pull the vehicle out. And with that being right there on that apron, it is 3 inches from the doorway. So that is not a safe situation. It's not safe for motorists who might be coming down the road, and it's not safe for the firemen trying to drive that vehicle out of there. So the other issues with that particular facility is some of you may have heard, we just hired our very first full-time female firefighter. Problem is we don't have facilities for her. We did kind of cobble together a bunk area, but we don't have any separate bathrooms and we only have 1 shower. So things like that we need to look at. We haven't evolved with the modern day workforce when it comes to that facility. Our other facilities are all aging as well, except for our public works building. That one's pretty new, but Lisa just came to me today with the issue with the library with being able to waterproof it. That building was built back in the 70s. It's an old roller rink and it was never designed to do what it's doing. And we're gonna put $50,000 into it to waterproof it. And it's not a facility that's going to be here for another 40 to 50 years. It's, at what point do you stop putting lipstick on a pig or pouring money down a black hole? And the town office itself, again, it's attached to the fire department. I can't say with 100% certainty that it's better to rebuild than to renovate, but with the costs of renovation and the age of that building, we're probably better off looking at something that's not quite as traditional of a town facility. I mean, a lot of people, when they think government structures, they're thinking brick and mortar. Newer structures for town offices have gone away from that, and they're doing it much more cost effectively than these older, more institutional looking structures. So I have concerns in that building personally when I see some of my staff that have some respiratory issues. Is there mold in there? Is there asbestos? And it would not be a cheap renovation. So I think there's facilities that may have outgrown their useful life, and we really need to look at how long we want to continue propping them up, band-aiding them, and doing some of these smaller renovations before we decide we're spending really too much money on them in the long run. I mean, life of a building, you know, usually around 50 years or so. This one has hit that, gone beyond it. So not that we would do that in the next, you know, even 2 years, but we should be looking 5 years down the road. What do we need to do with this building?
Absolutely. I think I mentioned this before, but this is not uncommon. Winslow isn't the only community that's dealing with the aging buildings. A lot of communities are looking at having to resite and rebuild their public safety buildings, if nothing else. Ray?
Yeah, Joel, just to add on to what Erica said, we recently the school vacated the junior high building. So the junior high building is now a Winslow Town facility. So we have to make the decision and within the next year probably of what we're going to do with the junior high building. Right now, I think the consensus probably would be to tear it down, but I'm not entirely sure. That's going to be something that we'll have to develop in the future, but that's a cost that's going to be pretty high.
Peter?
So Ray, wild idea. Could it be turned into a beautiful town office, public safety building and library?
I think that's to be determined what the actual use, if any, that building will have for the future. And I think all options are open presently, but they are dwindling, I believe. So I'm not sure.
I think there are some uses, but a public safety facility is probably not a good one. There's a few obstacles to that, but I would think that a most immediate one would be that it's on the school campus. And just for the fact of having the vehicles, emergency vehicles coming in and out at the frequency and often with the urgency that they travel, that's probably not a good idea.
Got it.
You know, it will take significant investment if it is to be renovated rather than torn down. I think there are some viable uses for it, but it's going to take, it would take the right offer and the right investor to do something that is amenable to the council and to the town members.
I might throw out there that the town of Monmouth has been going through, I think this process has been going on for several years now, trying to decide what to do with an old school campus. And, you know, it's sometimes not easy because one of the other additional factors is that people have a lot of sentimental attachment to school buildings. And so it's not as simple as just tearing it down and turning it into something else. People have an attachment to that and trying to figure out where is that balance with taking on the cost of renovating a building, which can be really extensive.
Absolutely.
Lisa, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but do you have any thoughts about the facilities at the library at the moment that there might be need for to be recorded in the comprehensive plan?
Well, as the town has obviously developed and the demographics have changed since the building was turned into a library. And then Winslow's done a great job in using what we've got, but there's a great deal of need for meeting rooms, for educational spaces, and we act also as kind of like a historical society as well as a library, and then we're a community center. And then, so, you know, the space is just really not meeting the needs. We do a great job, I think, in trying to create modules within the space, but I talk to patrons every day, and while they love the library, they wish, you know, we could do a little more here, we could provide this, we could provide that. And so all of that's going to need to be taken into account when we evaluate the continued life of that space. We're also in the middle of nowhere, really. A lot of people have told me they have no idea where we are. I mean, I will admit, when I went to interview, I had to Google it because I'm going, Winslow has a public library. I've never driven by it. So, you know, having us closer to the town office, public safety, some of those things too, having more of a campus for town facilities, I think would give all the different departments, us and rec especially, some needed exposure and also allow us to share things, you know, environmentals and parking and meeting rooms and things like that, so we could better utilize some spaces.
Wonderful. Thanks so
That's
much,
my
Lisa.
vision as well, is to have a campus at some point that is not necessarily single buildings that everybody's housed under one roof, but a campus where everything is co-located. So it's one-stop shopping for residents and visitors, and also helps us to leverage some of those combined needs with each other and not be just so far spread apart. You know, we got Public Works and the library kind of out there on an island, and the rest of us are kind of, you know, we're all together, but yeah, I agree, Lisa, that's definitely, I am not surprised that people don't know where the library is. It's not where you'd expect it to be, for sure.
It's right on the fringes out there, just before you start to head into the more rural area, isn't it? Can anyone think of any particular public services that the town might think to start to offer that it doesn't necessarily now? Or, I mean, I know budgets are what they are, but you've got to start somewhere. Is there anything that the town feels like, or the folks feel like the town could look into providing in the future that it doesn't currently? Right?
Yeah, I think recycle. I'd like to see, you know, I know we have food recycling right now, but I like to see the recycling picked up a little bit back to cardboard corrugation. I know right now it's a truck into Waterville to drop them off, and I'd like to see somehow Winslow advance that. I know Waterville just recently, I believe they've approved actually curbside recycling now. So, you know, I think we're behind the 8 ball in that. And I think for certain products, recycling is still something we need to investigate.
Might even tie into that regional cooperation idea if there's ways to make it work, you know, on a 2 community basis rather than paying for it twice. Anyone else any thoughts about that? If you do, just you know, pipe up at any time or drop it in the chat, or, you know, at any point, if anything occurs to anyone, you know, like tomorrow evening or something, then just feel free to I'm sure Erica won't mind an email, or myself. I'll just put my email in the chat.
I feel like I'm dominating the conversation, so I have opinions on every one of these things that comes up, but I want to give somebody else the chance to speak. But Ray and I have had a lot of discussions about recycling, and I think it's definitely something. I know we got some comments when we started the food waste program, which is fantastic, but the comments were, you know, why don't we have just regular old recycling? We're getting food recycling. That's kind of a niche, you know, that it's more of an unusual thing to have when we don't even have the ability to recycle cardboard. So, I mean, we do, you can take it over to iRecycle, but you know, this is what I did my capstone on for my master's degree, was promoting residential recycling behavior. And the harder you make it for people, the less they're going to do it. It needs to be convenient. And in my mind, driving across the river to the other side of Waterville is not highly convenient. And I think we could really be getting a lot of participation if we had something available. But that possibility of maybe working with Waterville and doing something there, maybe that's something that we could work at. And you know, I think just coming out of this meeting, maybe I'll reach out to Steve Daly over there and see what his immediate reaction to that is.
Wonderful. Just very quickly then, what about things like actual infrastructure of the town in terms of water and sewer, and you know, one of the major things now is broadband internet provision. Are those, would folks say that those are adequate in terms of their reach and their performance? I mean, would it make sense, for example, to potentially look at extending water and sewer to help with development, and also is the town can everyone that wants to get good broadband provision get it in town, or is there some like areas that don't?
I can't speak about broadband as much. I'm not that familiar with it, but I can speak about sewer and water. And really, if you look at sewer and water, you also have to talk about storm drainage and
Right, yeah.
that infrastructure too. And we're inadequate right now is because, you know, we had a failure on the pipe from Chaffee Brook across the river. So that 12-inch pipe now is an 8-inch pipe, and that 8-inch pipe is the only, if we lost that 8-inch pipe, we wouldn't be able to get sewer over to the sewer treatment plant from the whole town of Winslow. So that project is upgrading the pumps, but also trenching the river and putting in I believe it's a 16-inch pipe, but don't quote me on that. And then if you look at Sunset Heights, we've just started the engineering alone for the water and sewer, and that is probably going to top $100,000. So that's the engineering alone. So over the next couple of years, we're looking at millions and millions and millions of dollars on infrastructure for aging sewer and water and storm drainage also in that area. So that development was built in the 60s and in the 50s and 60s, and now is just showing its age tremendously, and it has to be revamped. And that's just the Sunset Heights area is we were talking that side of the river. So I hate to be Johnny Raincloud, but the water and sewer is in tough shape, and we need to put a major investment into that in the future, which plays into a lot of the infrastructure that we're going to talk about. Is there's just, you know, we're about 8,000 people here in the town of Winslow. I don't know how many taxpayers that is, but we're considered a small community. And so to meet the needs of everybody, and like Erica said, I don't want to keep going because I could keep going for 2 or 3 hours, but you know, we're a small bedroom community, and we rely heavily on the proportion of property taxes for improvements here in town. And so that puts a burden every time we make a bond or something, the taxpayers, individual households take quite a licking.
The actual numbers, Chaffee Brook's 5 million. That one, at least we're further down the road. We've got a pretty good estimate on that. Sunset Heights, they just did our preliminary estimate, and it's over 7 million. Those are some scary figures, you know, that, and when we talk about needing new infrastructure to build new housing, you have to be able to maintain infrastructure when you build it. And that's a big problem because we can't maintain the infrastructure we've already got with the funding that we have. Now, there are some possibilities coming down the road. We have applied for the earmark funding that's coming down through our senators, but they've got a lot of applications. So are they going to choose Winslow and Chaffee Brook, or are they going to bypass us for somebody else? I don't know what other projects have been submitted. They did have a very short turnaround time to get those projects submitted. So hopefully that limited the number of communities that applied for that funding. We don't qualify for the state CWSRF funds because we are just the tiniest bit above the income threshold. So that leaves us out of contention for some of those loan forgiveness programs or extremely low interest loans. So
I wonder if any of that might change with some new census data.
Well, we can
maybe
hope
recalculate it. Yeah.
Yeah, the census, I don't know. I've heard different projections on if that will go down at all. You know, but we are right on that fine line. So if we went down, that some of that funding might open up for us. But again, I think this goes back to why we need to attract some businesses that are going to take some of this burden off the homeowner. I do disagree a little bit that Winslow's a small community because you're in the top 25% of communities in the state. I mean, it's not small for the state of Maine. It's small when you compare it to Bangor or Portland, or a lot of the southern communities, but it is not a small town. It has big town costs. It has big town infrastructure.
Certainly
it has
one of the
big
bigger
town
communities that
services.
we work with in our region. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
I mean, you might, I mean, there's relative to each side, it's small or large, depending on which way you look at it. But like you say, I mean, your budget will prove out how large it is in that sense. And like you say, yeah, it has to be infrastructure, it has to be looked after and sustainable, and you can't always rely on
When you're trying to
opportunities
balance,
for money.
When you're trying to
You have to be
balance
able
the
to
budget,
pay for it
it
yourself,
seems
yeah.
damn small. When you're trying to
Yeah.
balance that budget, it's not big. It's not big enough. That's all I can say about that.
The budget's never big enough, but
Right. Yeah.
These are reasons why I think it's important to think about density in the future when it comes to housing, because that tends to keep those costs down. I mean, if we're, continuing to sprawl out in the town and build new infrastructure out to a small subdivision, that's super costly. But if we start thinking about ways to densify what we have, that helps save those costs, at least for future people that are thinking about these issues like we are today.
You're right, Jim. If you look at Sunset Heights, where you have the plot of land is, some of them are on a quarter acre, the density there is, and it's suitable. It's great housing. It's just, everybody keeps their property up for the most part. And it's very, very functional there for sewer and water infrastructure.
And I believe we talked about this in the last meeting too, about trying to repurpose the land where we've already got that infrastructure for the exact same reasons Jim was talking about. If we continue to sprawl out into the rural areas, that is very costly and probably not real feasible when it comes to finding the money to develop, unless you've got a developer that wants to also foot the bill for the infrastructure. I don't know that that's likely given the actual cost that would run. So absolutely, we need to look at what areas we already have set up with that infrastructure and how do we maximize the housing potential in those areas.
Yeah, or commercial as it may be. Did anyone have any particular thoughts about broadband? I know it's a big issue at the moment in terms of
I'm not super educated on it, but I can say that, when we're talking stimulus funds, one of the big things that they're pushing is broadband. And in Winslow, we're actually doing pretty good as far as everyone having access and at the minimum speeds that they're talking about. So the only infrastructure needs that are specifically written into that funding are water, sewer, and broadband. And we don't have any ability to really use the broadband money. We're just not in a position where it's a huge need in Winslow. We're actually pretty fortunate. Now, there are areas where we don't have fiber run, but that's different than saying we don't have broadband access. Yeah. So we're actually doing pretty good on those, on that particular access in our area.
That's good, because in terms of making a community attractive for somewhere people to move to, an attractive place. We can talk about a lot of things, but these days now it's as important as anything to check what the internet service like it's a potential house that you might want to buy, for example, just the same as you would look up the school district or other things like that. If it doesn't have good internet, it's going to put a lot of people off from because these days everything's changed. People can potentially work from home, work from anywhere these days. So you could live in Winslow, work in California or something like that if you had a good enough, reliable and affordable internet connection. And do you get most of your service through Spectrum? Is that the majority provider? Yeah. Okay. Anyone have any other thoughts in the general sense to do with public service or anything like public services or anything like that before we move on to talking about growth and land use?
Some of that will depend on this potential infrastructure plan too from the federal government, right?
Absolutely.
So with regard to grants and other things that are potentially available with that. And I guess when it comes to broadband, I'd be curious, and I think Erica alluded to this, but what other towns in our region are look like? You know, how do we compete on that level? I really have no idea, but you know, I personally haven't had any issues with the broadband, but you know, how do we look compared to our peers, I guess, if we're thinking about this as a community that we want to attract young workers to, you know, it certainly is going to be important. So we don't want to lag on that for sure, in my view, but I know that money is the big issue.
Absolutely. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what because there seems to be really a focus on that now statewide, well, nationally, but particularly in the state now with new department perhaps being formed or office, whatever it might be, to really get the ball rolling on that. And, you know, if there's opportunities out there to strengthen or at least get some funding, then we have to keep an eye on that for sure.
One of the things I think is broadband is not bad just because there's so many people in the town of Winslow, even in my neighborhood alone and outside, that are working from home right now. So if we had a serious problem, I think we would have heard more about the connections that we have. Just my thought. My daughter is an environmental scientist, and all over the world she works from home, but she has projects all over the world that she needs to look at Google Maps and all this stuff that, you know, and high resolution type of stuff. And she seems to be, you know, and other people that work in similar fields seem to say that, you know, that they're having not a lot of issues working from home right now. So hopefully we're in pretty good shape.
Do you get a good enough connection at the library, Lisa?
Well, we're part of the main school and library network.
Yeah.
So we're actually getting an upgrade. We're in the process of getting
Good.
an upgrade to 1 terabyte of speed for us.
Excellent. Yeah.
The problem with the school and library network is that right now, the way the state has it written, our outside signal, we cannot extend past our parking lot. There is a push at the state level to change those rules so that we could participate in a federal program that would give us an outside wireless signal. And then that way we could expand it through our parking lot, maybe over to Public Works, other areas around the library. But right now, if we would extend it past our parking lot, we would lose our connection. So that's
Interesting.
something
Okay.
that's being worked on at the state level and at the main school and library network level. We're fortunate in this area that we have Thomas, Colby, and KVCC, because the federal government has established a national broadband backbone for colleges, hospitals, and other institutions like that. And so we've got a pretty good infrastructure in this area in general.
So that's good. Okay. Just a quick reminder, if you come on late, we have a little poll running. There's a good percentage of people that have done it so far looking at it. But if you just want to take a second to complete the poll where you choose, there's 7 different topic areas, and basically rate how important you think those are for the town to consider potentially working on or investing in, so to speak, in the general sense. Feel free to fill that out as we go along. We'll keep that up for the duration of the meeting. Okay, so the last topic we want to talk about, which we've already touched on quite a bit, which is not surprising, I think, because it all kind of links together, is that it's going to growth, land use, and zoning. So part of the plan, or a very significant part of the plan, is what's called the future land use chapter. So the plan will essentially designate what it calls loosely growth areas. So this would be, in the future, if the town is going to develop in different ways, whether it be residential, commercial, and such things, where would the town ideally like to do that? And if you've got existing zoning in town, which Winslow does, I'm just going to, for the purposes of this discussion, I'm going to share the screen with the current zoning map on it. So the general question would be, well, where would you consider your growth zones? Now, so that might come actually down to more focused questions about what the town might want to do in terms of amending some of these. The discussion at the last, we've already talked a little bit about it, but the discussion at the last meeting certainly pivoted towards the current status of the orange area here, which is the mixed use. Now, again, this is slightly different than sometimes we talk about mixed use within an existing structure, or small scale development where there's commercial mixed with residential in a very focused area. But I think this is obviously a bit of a different concept in terms of the Winslow zoning that has this mixed use area. It's basically a big long corridor really that goes along 201 from there. And then Route 100 up towards Benton. I think the idea is there that mixed use in this sense is that you could allow both residential and certain types of commercial along any of these areas, which is obviously a different concept. And I know we've talked about how to look at potentially expanding areas to give enough space for residential development and commercial development. Does anyone have any general thoughts about how the town is zoned at the moment and things that might be somewhat problematic? Because I think some of the talk before was that we may need to reconsider some of the mixed use zone, because it really doesn't provide the protection of someone living there in a residential property, for example, against their neighbouring lot developing something that would probably seem fairly incompatible to them, although technically it might be allowed. Is that something that people have experienced in terms of this kind of mixed use zone where there might have been somewhat considered incompatible uses like popping up next to each other?
If I might, Joel, just for a second. I've been on the Winslow Town Council now for 12 years, and during those 12 years, some of the hardest problems that have come across the council is the mixed use zone, is businesses near residential and mixed use, allowing mixed use. We've constantly, many times during the year, faced these issues of businesses creeping in the mixed use area into residential areas. And it's probably one of the hardest problems where sometime, we'll rezone areas so that we can have a business come in and rezone it, and then, to mixed use so businesses come in. And residents obviously have concerns, some more than others and some justified. And in my stay on the council, those have been the hardest decisions and some of the hardest issues that we've had to face from people and residents is that mixture in that compromising of industrial versus residential areas.
And do we think that there's enough? I think we talked about potential issue with something like we have what's relative. Well, we have these industrial districts, and then we have various densities of residential, but there's no specific commercial itself. I guess that's integrated into the mixed use. But is it safe to say that there's something like the industrial district might not be sufficient at the moment in terms of space?
Definitely could use some industrial areas where we could do it. The industrial park, people thought that that wasn't going to fly, but yet that industrial park, people were just clamoring to get into that facility. If we had an extension on the industrial park, which we can't do, I think it would really warrant an industrial park. Believe it or not, doesn't even have sewer. And I think it doesn't even have, it might have water, but it doesn't have sewer. But yet, you know, if we had abandoned warehouses in the town of Winslow right now, they would be just, people would be just clamoring over any type of industrial space at this particular time to move into.
Well, on the other end of the spectrum, I think we talked about housing, and we talked about, you know, rather than potentially expanding residential districts out into the rural area and causing kind of almost like that traditional idea of residential sprawl, should, you know, if we're going to build, where should the next 50 houses be built? Should we try and incentivize infill development and redevelopment within existing residential areas, as opposed to on the existing infrastructure, as opposed to trying to push out those boundaries and continue to see residential growth kind of spiraling outwards along the rural roads? Would that be a sensible thing to suggest?
I think it would be. I think when you're looking at a place where is right in the middle of the town, there's like 40 acres of pretty prime land where you could put a mixture of homes. If you could put, higher end homes on one end, maybe more conservative type of homes on the other end, and could sort of use that in town. So if I see a potential for growth as far as housing goes, and the infrastructure would have, the connections are there, you would just have to extend the infrastructure. So hopefully at some point in time, some developer will get a hold of and submit a plan that follows through for that type of infrastructure, where you could extend existing streets and have a mixture of high end and more conservative homes. But it's in the private hands, and you can only do so much to, if a developer wants to develop, what can we do to we've already, I think, done what we could to try to make it economical, but that's the potential that I see in the middle of town that has infrastructure in place.
Yeah. I think then it all ties together. If we think about, trying to work on improve Winslow as a whole, so it becomes a very attractive place for people to want to come and live. If there's that demand there, then hopefully, the market does its job, and developers see the opportunity there to. This is a high demand community, and would want to, finance development. And if we could encourage them to do it in the right places, then that's all the better, I think. What about almost like the flip side of the coin, as opposed to encouraging development? What about protecting natural resources, whether that be, the river itself, or Patty's Pond, or you could even environmentally sensitive areas, or even, I guess, protection for agricultural land? Do we think there is, adequate regulations at a municipal level, at Winslow's level, that help protect the natural resources in town? Does that seem to be okay at the moment, or does that need some consideration?
I think we have a couple of programs that are aimed at least protecting our agricultural assets. And I know that Kate and Sally and probably Peter can talk better to that overall. However, a couple of programs that I would point out, we have a property that we sold. Well, the sale hasn't still completely gone through yet, because we have to finish all the back end paperwork on the easements, but the Maine Farmland Trust, we just put 101 acres on the Maple Ridge Road into that program. So that's a state program that requires that property be used as a for-profit farm, and the profit margin's pretty low. It's $2,000 a profit a year, but that's one of the properties that we've just put into that type of program. We also have the Voluntary Municipal Farm Support Program. And there's one farm that's been in there for a number of years, which is the Hapworth Farm, but we just added another one in the Wheeler Farm just last month. So those programs are out there and they're available. The Ag Commission is the point on that. So I would let Kate or Sally speak further to those programs. Another area that we need to pay attention to is Patty's Pond. Clearly that's developed on pretty much the shorelines, but we do need to continue to be aware of the pressures that having all those camps right on that shore put on the water quality. I have had some recent conversations with residents over there that they're concerned that we're starting to get a lot of algae bloom in there again, which was cleaned up a few years ago, but we've got some issues with drainage going into the lake and things like that. So our shoreland zoning ordinance should do a pretty good job at protecting that. But again, it requires enforcement and it requires continual follow-up to make sure that all those things are happening to keep that area safe.
Absolutely, yeah. I think I'm trying to remember the gentleman's name, but he's been very good about. I think he's with the Patty's Pond Association about keeping an eye on water quality and making sure that that's continually. Yeah, Larry, that's it. Continually
Yep.
monitoring that, and yeah, it recently has become an issue. I think there's been an issue with perhaps phosphorus or something in there, Patty's Pond, which is more than just the whole catchment area as land use can affect that. It all eventually drains down into the pond. But I mean, there is an existing zone, overlay zone, I guess, for the water protection, so that should make sure that that's got everything in that it needs to. And like you say, it's all really about enforcement and monitoring. So anyone else have any thoughts about that in terms of either natural resource protection or agricultural?
I'm wondering, Joel, and I would ask Erica and Ray because I don't know, and I may not quite have the terms right. My understanding is when there's heavy rain, sewer system can be overwhelmed. And then, so raw sewage might be dumped into the river. Is that, there was this was years ago that I heard this containment that isn't functioning. And so help me out here.
No, we had a failure of the line that goes across the river. As far as other overflows, yes, they do happen when you get these 100-year type flood or these significant rains. When you're getting, it doesn't sound like much, but when you get an inch of rain in an hour, that's an incredible load on your stormwater system. We actually have, I just toured KSTD on Friday, actually, and looked at the facilities over there across the river at the sanitary district. And they actually have extra capacity built in now because they had an issue in Waterville, actually in fairly recent years, where there was one of these large rain events that caused the system to overflow. It can't be prevented 100%. The sanitary sewer, combined sewer operations, or that's a big issue overall throughout the United States because historically there have been a lot of sewer systems that are actually designed to overflow to the rivers. And so the EPA has pushed to have those mitigated over years. Back when I was in Lansing in the 90s, we were working our CSO program. And it was a 30-year program at that time just because of the quantity of infrastructure that needed to be addressed. Winslow itself, we do have a CSO plan. The Kennebec Sanitary District helps us stay on top of that. We are not in any danger in Winslow of being on the state's radar at this point. I did talk to Nick Champagne about this just on Friday, and we're actually in pretty good shape over here, although there are some additional measures that we're supposed to be taking within the next few years. But we have not had a significant event in Winslow in a considerable amount of time. So, but Waterville is definitely, they're on the radar because they had a much more recent event.
think
Thank
in the
you.
last 5 years, Paul has told me recently, and maybe I'm wrong, Erica, but we've had maybe 1 or 2 events in the 5 years. And that's why that's why Chaffee Brook investment is so important in the near future. That 8-inch pipe is sufficient 98% of the time, but we're always worried about that 2% of the time, those events that it might not happen. And if we have a failure of that 8-inch pipe right now, there's no backup. So I think they're putting 2 pipes in, right, Erica? I think that
They
the
are
trench
putting-
will handle 2 pipes.
Yes, and the pipe that failed was a larger pipe, and that's the one that when we ran the replacement, it was smaller diameter, and we're relying solely on that smaller diameter pipe right now. That's one of the reasons this project is so important. So that, because it does handle our regular daily flow. But if we do get one of those 100-year rain events or something like that, we are in danger of overflowing.
They seem to be happening more and more often now.
They are. That is a concern, that our weather is becoming more and more unpredictable. We are seeing larger storms, and we're seeing them happen more frequently. So it is very important to get this done. And Ray is right. We've had some incidents, but we haven't had significant incidents other than the failure of that pipe, which was not it wasn't a CSO issue. It was the pipe itself just failed, and it's in the river. So clearly not a great thing to have happen. So, but that was quite a few years ago. We need to upgrade now so that we are ready to handle, whether it be that we have more flow because we've got more industry, more people moving in, or just that we need to be prepared for that environmental incident that could happen that we have absolutely no control over.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just as an example, I think I did notice a comment on the Facebook feed about issues. I think in the mixed use zone where there's been some form of solar development within there that's not particularly thought to be compatible with neighborhood uses, but that's one of those examples where not everyone feels that's working for them, unfortunately. And solar is one of the big issues at the moment, especially in the large scale development of. Is there anyone any other thoughts in general about is it safe to say that if we're talking about where future development or the growth area, as it's termed, would be, that would be within the existing zones as is, without having to necessarily look at, we talked about maybe potentially expanding industrial areas, but not pushing out too far out into the existing rural areas in order to, like say, maintain somewhat of a density. Is that safe to say people would agree with that? Seeing a few nods of heads, then I'll take that as good for now. I appreciate that. One of the things we have to do is almost like designate the growth areas. So if we make sure that they endeavor to stick within the existing zoning infrastructure, the existing zoning structure, then that's good to know as we get to complete this document. Oh, we're heading up almost on 8 o'clock. Any last comments on land use before we have a quick look at the vision statement, and then we can call it a night? Or any other comments in general about anything that we haven't covered or want to reiterate or open forum?
Yes, a big thank you to you, Joel.
Oh, you're welcome. No, I mean, it's my pleasure. Yeah. It's the first time we've done a fully virtual version of this, which is interesting. Hopefully in the future we'll be able to do in-person events, if not hybrid, because that seems to be a way for people to be able to connect into these things. But thank you so much. Believe it or not, I actually quite enjoy a lot of these discussions. It really is informative to see what is the issues people are living with that we work with every day.
Yeah, Joel, I gotta take off, but I just wanted to say that thank everybody for coming and spending some time with us tonight. You know, sometimes we get out in our communities and we have a lot of individual conversations, but we don't usually have a back and forth like this. And this is like, you know, when you get into a council meeting and budget meetings, it's order number 17 and bang, and order number 16 and vote, and everybody kind of gets out. It's a pretty, you got 2 minutes to talk, but we can't respond. But this type of format, and I think, Erica, moving forward, we should look into like having a virtual town meeting every so often and just invite people to come in and speak to us and to get to know the faces in our community and get to know what their concerns are, not just at council meetings or public comments, but during, and I think this is a great format. One of the things about the pandemic is that maybe it opens up opportunities to do things a little differently. And I think we need to investigate that. And again, I'd like to thank everybody, all of the people from the town, but the people from the municipality too, for coming in and being part of this process. And thank you very much. And I'll leave you for the rest of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray.
I think Ray is, that's a good idea. Another program that I've wanted to get off the ground, and I've got a million of them, and I'm having trouble figuring out where to start eating the elephant first. But one of the things I would like to start doing is having a either a coffee or a lunch with the manager series once a month that is focused kind of on our local business community and trying to get their input and thoughts as to, you know, what can we do to support them? What will bring other businesses in? How can they in turn support the town and the things that we need to get done? And I think Ray's town hall idea is great. I see that as being more of a resident type thing, although I could certainly see doing a coffee with the manager that's for residents. I wouldn't tell anybody not to attend anyway, but it just seems that I'd really like to get the business community engaged, because I think their participation in anything we do going forward is going to be key to really, you know, be able to make this sustainable and get the town to where we'd all love to see it. I mean, you know, I think there's so much potential here. It's just untapped. And I wish there were, you know, 48 hours in a day instead of 24, but you know, anyway, one of my crazy ideas. So.
Wonderful. So really quickly then, just before we finish, I just want to share the existing draft of what's called the vision statement. And like I say earlier on, this is supposed to be basically a succinct version that kind of really articulates what Winslow wants to be, the ideal community that it sees itself working towards. Like I said, there was an older one from the last plan, 2008, which was very short and almost kind of, I think it was agreed by the committee and folks that certainly it needed updating. So we kind of brainstormed some ideas and we basically tried to pick out key words, key phrases, and noted those down, and essentially kind of distilled it into almost like a 3-sentence structure, as we see here. I've already got a couple of notes on from the last time that we talked about this. I'll just read this out in person so that everyone can hear who might not be able to see the screen. So the current version of the vision statement for Winslow is that Winslow is a thriving and vibrant town that balances a close-knit community with a growing commercial and industrial base. It seeks to maintain an agricultural, recreational, and ecological character while taking advantage of developing compatible business opportunities while providing world-class educational assets for its citizens. It welcomes collaboration between residents, town officials, businesses, and surrounding communities to meet the needs of the future. There was a couple of notes just to change on that. One which was just we used the word while a little much, which for, you know, we can certainly just change to not change the meaning of what's there, but just so the language is a little better duplication. One note just to say that it actively encourages collaboration rather than welcomes, so it's actually working towards it. And the last one, just that we make sure that the way that we refer to the town, whether it be it or we as a community or it as a town, just I think we probably want it to be we as in the community speaking about itself, as opposed to an outside town that nobody's connected to. So did anyone have any particular thoughts about this? Is there anything that's not in there that people might want to see added, particular word, particular thing that's not really addressed in there, or anything particular that they might want to tweak?
So I was thinking about the first sentence there in the new template, thriving and vibrant town. It almost reads as if those two things, the balance is a close-knit community with a growing commercial industrial base, those almost seem like they're at odds in the way the sentence is constructed. And so potentially thinking about ways to make those compatible, you know, that these things work together to create a vibrant community. I don't know how to
No,
word
I
that,
think I get what you're saying. Yeah, it does. It almost suggests that they are like in opposition, like you said.
Yeah.
Does that sound reasonable, everyone? If we try and tweak that just to make it a little less attritional.
And maybe there's not a better way to say it. It's just kind of.
No, I think I understand your point now. I'm looking at it. Yeah, we could probably we could keep the same the sentiment that we want to get there, but just make it. Yeah, I completely understand.
Yeah.
Anyone else got any comments about that? I mean, I guess it's a good sign that this is looking good. Again, there's plenty of time to adjust this down the line. Hopefully it will be. This is probably going to be right at the front of the plan at the beginning. So it should be hopefully all encompassing about what the plan actually does represent and hope to develop. So I will take it from that this is certainly an excellent point to a place to work on. We can always revise it as we go forward if needed. And of course, you know, everyone has to incorporate instead of balances. Okay, I'm going to write that on so I don't forget. Anyone else got any, before we kind of finish up, has anyone else got anything that we haven't talked about? Could be anything, it's all good. Nope.
I like the vision statement. It's just a matter of putting, you know, our money and our resources where our mouth is, I guess. Right? Absolutely. I mean, that gives us something to shoot for, I should say. Yeah.
All right then. Well, thank you so much, everyone. I appreciate it. This has been, like I say, along with the other one, I think this has given us lots and lots of good information that we've recorded. We recorded this. We'll have the recording available should anyone want it. We'll have, obviously, it's kind of digitally stored on the town's Facebook page. It'll be on there. As soon as we streamed it live, it's on there to rewatch anytime there. And going forward, we will post notices about the upcoming comprehensive plan meetings that hopefully people get to know about and are welcome to come and attend, along with the dedicated committee. And we'll, as we go forward on the back end of this plan, we'll use all this information to make some really forward-thinking and useful goals and policies. Yeah, thank you, everyone. We'll call it a night there. And I'm sure I'll speak to some of you fairly soon, but I appreciate all your input. It's been really good. Thank you.
Thank you all for taking the time tonight. Appreciate it.
Good night, folks. Thanks, Eric.